So, when I was really working in the creative world, I worked for a creative production company. There were generic IPs. Mr. Adam Dvorchak is here, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, you are. And these were where the stories were being told: ghosts and leprechauns, and dinosaurs, pirates. But over the last 10 years, I've seen this trend of movie IPs and books take over, right? And I see stuff like this. Literally, I made a lot of this up, but they're usually an attraction based around some known mega hit. And very very little original IP is showing up. And I thought, is this a trend? No people are talking about it. Or you see a lot of this, which is kind of the opposite end, where you're copycatting existing attractions. And that isn't a great trend either for the creative department. Right? So, I know it's in conversation. Clara, I think you participated on a panel last year, right? And we believe original character development can be just as successful as having a branded IP. And this one was kind of interesting from John. It's important to give characters a reason to be there, right? And not just buy an IP because it's a mega hit, but why is James Bond on a roller coaster? So today's modern attraction, fantastic success, we can't deny it, right? Universal has built their whole business around it. Disney is now moving towards more IP-based attractions than land, right? So you can't really deny it. But is there a room for original IP? That's the question I'm asking. Typically, three avenues to travel down: original IP, licensed IP, and copycat IP. Right? What does this mean for the future of innovation? What does this mean for new attractions and originality? So I've asked creative designers, creative writers, have we lowered our expectations for this group? Are we reducing the need for writing skills? I'm not trying to insult anybody, but I'm asking the question. Only those who speak may be guilty. Are we translating, Adam, content from one medium to the next? And aren't designers given freedoms anymore? Or are they just handed an IP and say, design attraction around this? Stick to the script. We know the outcome. We know the characters. That's an advantage, I think, on some level. But what is it doing to chip away at the creativity and originality of attraction? I asked owner operators the same thing. Are the risks too high for going with original content? Good question. Owners and developers, are they playing it safe? Do they believe that their IP is the magic IP that's going to guarantee success? And most importantly, what do the owner operators want? Yeah, I know it's a financial model, it's a business model, but is there a long-term vision of developing characters, of developing an originality, and making movies based on the stuff they developed at theme parks? Good question. Oh yeah. And what do the visitors want? Right? Good question. What's important to the guest? Is recognizable IP really matter? If the attraction is dynamic, it's good. It tells a story. It pulls at the heartstrings. Is the generic genre relevant? Is it valuable today? Are we designing attractions? I'd love to hear from the creative writers and designers. Adam, if you're writing current scripts based around ghosts or dinosaurs or things of that nature. And is entertainment better or worse one way or another? So, what I thought I'd do is I wanted to get a couple creatives who have experience creating original IP attractions and ask the question, have them talk about what were the decisions they were faced, or the decisions they made, and what were the questions they were faced with in order to go one way or another. What kind of resistance did they get from the marketing department or an owner's rep or something of that nature? And then I'm bringing Mark on board to talk about the business aspect, the owner-operator aspect. I think this is a great dialogue. People are talking about it. But I'd love to see more originality come into our modern theme parks and attractions. I think there's a need for it. And not just follow suit to a movie-based or a book-based attraction. I see people kind of nodding their heads, and I think there's some emotion here to it. But let's talk about it on some level. So we're gonna bring up Joe, we're gonna bring up Ron, and we're gonna bring up Mark to talk about their personal perspective on original IP versus a licensed IP. So without further ado, Joe. Yep, you got it.
Okay, very good. Can you hear me? Hello. Okay, good. Good afternoon. Great to be here. Great to see a lot of familiar faces, friends I haven't seen in a while. It also just points up what a small industry this really is. So I was very fortunate and got to develop a original IP-driven story, original story, not based on IP. And often, there's a whole series of things that, the planets have to align, especially at a big company like Disney. We Hong Kong Disneyland, the park opened. I don't know if maybe you're familiar. It was the smallest of our Magic Kingdom parks and kind of a very interesting market. And struggled a little bit at first, mostly because it was pretty much a cookie cutter park. It's a beautiful park and beautiful setting, but most of the attractions that were there were things that existed in other Disney parks around the world. So I was given the assignment to help grow the park, and our government partners, they're majority shareholders, our Hong Kong government friends, and they wanted some wholly unique product for the park, but we wanted to stay true to the Disney Magic Kingdom DNA. So we looked at things that weren't in the park, things like Frontierland. So instead of adding Frontierland, they wanted their own unique story. So we did Grizzly Gulch, which is basically just a riff on that. And we said, well, what else is missing from the park? We had our small world. We had considered pirates, but for various reasons we chose not to do pirates. So then the last one we hadn't addressed was Haunted Mansion. And it was great to see that Haunted Mansion got #1 on the list, because for all the same reasons that you voted Haunted Mansion #1 was all the reasons we loved about it, because it was really this grand illusion attraction. It was about magic brought to life. And as you can see, the other Haunted Mansion. So initially the thought was, well, let's do another Haunted Mansion. But then after doing a little bit of research, and we do our research, I enjoyed the previous talk, because we do try to listen to what the market tells us, especially when you're in a place with very different cultural viewpoints about things, and the Chinese had a very different viewpoint about the afterlife. And happy seeing ghosts didn't resonate. So we had to kind of rethink the story that we were going to develop here. I'm going to backtrack for 1 second and talk a little bit about the value in this market in Hong Kong and in China, and I'm sure many of you address this when you have to think about IP and known stories. Disney is a big company. Our stories are well known all around the world, but what we found in China, and particularly in this market, some stories are known better than others. And the good news is that our guests don't normally come pre-wired with all the emotional stuff that many of our domestic guests have. Everybody, practically everybody on the planet now has seen Frozen, so all you have to do is play Let It Go, and it just, all these emotions just start coming up, and you have all those connections with the product, and your job is half done. You don't have to do anything else. That's all you have to do. And so in some ways it makes it easier. But in this market, they don't necessarily come pre-wired with all those, we call those emotional triggers. You can show that song or show a character, and they immediately go to that place and they know it. So then our job then is to, when you're developing new IP, and when we decided we're going to come up with a whole new story, was to try to understand or try to use all those same principles that the filmmakers and the media developers use to get that emotional response. To get those people going, oh. So Mystic Point was our version of a haunted mansion, mostly in the fact that it's an illusion-based ride. And we also wanted to take today's technology, what Walt didn't have when they did the haunted mansion, where it was an omni-mover and it had to be a continual cycle of imagery and effects. With a great magic trick, really needs a setup, the moment, and a payoff. And when you have a ride system that's just grinding through a building, it's hard to do that. So one of the first things we looked at was what are the technologies available? Our ride systems, projection, audio, all the cool things that all of us have now in order to deliver a 21st century version of what Walt did back in the 60s. Um, but more important, we have to think about what is that thing that makes a movie great and makes people have a connection with the product, and that's characters and story. So whether they come pre-wired with an understanding of a Frozen movie or not, you still have to find out how to tap into all those emotions that a movie does, or a great song, or any work of art that touches people in some way or another. So Disney always, and my background, by the way, is in animation. I studied with a lot of the nine old men that worked with Walt, and was very fortunate to be able to be mentored by those guys. And it was always about understanding the characters and building characters. So the first thing we wanted to do was create at the base of the story who the story is about. Lord Henry Mystic, and basically his son, but in the guise of a monkey, because again, doing some research in China and in that part of the world, the monkey has a lot of significance as a story driver. So the first thing we needed to do was let the guests know who these characters are and what the relationship is, especially if the monkey was going to be driving the experience. So in the pre-show, we deliberately set it up so guests have to almost stop as they walk through these things, because those any of you know who designed these attractions, it's unlike a movie where someone's sitting in a movie screen in a seat and watching the screen, and that information is going to get straight to them. In the park, there's all the distractions, strollers, kids screaming, trying to get in line, all those things that break focus. So we have to always work hard to make sure the information about these characters are set up in a way. So we just wanted to set up this relationship that Lord Henry Mystic is this world traveler. He goes around the world. This is in the turn of the century, the last century, and he collects antiquities, which is not a wholly original story, because basically I ripped myself off because we used that same story idea in Tokyo when we did the Tower of Terror there with Harrison Hightower. But basic same idea. So he's part of this group of explorers, go around the world, and along the way he rescues this monkey. So you immediately set up with the guests, you find out who this guy is, and you find out that he has an emotional, that they're now bonded. They're now bonded, and this is kind of his surrogate son. And then we wanted to set up that to help start foreshadowing what was going to happen in the ride, start setting up the experiences that they take on as they go around the world collecting these antiquities. Finally, with the last one there, as you saw, they find this music box, which becomes key to telling the story later on. Developing the monkey, we originally had two sets of designers, and the first set of designers had a very realistic look at the mansion and wanted to use a real looking monkey. And again, going back to my animation roots, I said, in these rides you have only moments to tell people how they're supposed to feel about what's going on. Mark Davis was absolutely masterful. Pirates of the Caribbean, why is it still rated so high? As you go through, you know how every single one of those characters is supposed to feel. That pirate that's ready to be dunked into the water, those pirates that are watching the sexy redhead, you know what they're thinking and how they're feeling. And that's what we have to do in these rides. So a realistic monkey doesn't necessarily communicate great expression quickly. The gigantic eyes, which we've been criticized about, actually are very much there by design, because the eyes are the window to the soul. And in moments, you know exactly how that monkey feels. And we want to take this monkey through a whole range of emotions, from scared to happy to in awe, and finally it to resolve. So that was a tool that we used. Monkey with big eyes. And this just shows a little bit of that. We were proud to say this is the first Disney character ever developed completely digitally. He was never sculpted by hand. We did him with ZBrush. We took the information and grew him, as you can see there, and then we took all that digital information and grew him out of foam, and all the parts were made off that. So it was the first kind of technologically designed character. Lord Henry, the same thing. And maybe we didn't have to go as far with him, but once you make a stylistic choice that the character is going to look a certain way, you want the universe to have continuity to it. So Lord Henry ended up having this very cartoony look too. And then actually the third character in this is the music dust, because the Lord Henry finds this music box, tells the monkey, don't touch the music box because it's supposed to have a curse on it, and the curse, not really a curse, it's this magic that turns inanimate objects to life. And we did all kinds of R&D trying to figure out how we were going to, because these days, everybody with all the great CG movies out there, they see things turn to dragons, turn to dust in front of their eyes, all these fantastic things, but we have to do this stuff real time in front of people. And a company called Bliss was playing with these computer operated lasers, and actually worked with us in creating this music dust that could dance and move three-dimensionally through space. So that became the third character that we had used in order to make this experience work. So pre-shows, as we all know, is where we do have hopefully that moment, like in a movie theater, where we can focus guests and say, this is what this whole experience is about. So pre-show in this attraction became very important. And we set up that you're going into this little salon, and Lord Henry is going to tell you about the tour of his mansion. You're going to get to see all these antiquities. And of course, right in the middle of it, it's interrupted by the monkey, who you find out is loose in the mansion. And the monkey, and we also set up some foreshadowing when Lord Henry's photo of the music box comes up, that, oh, the monkey likes that music box. So all that information is given to you in a short little concise pre-show. But also there's this moment when you first see the monkey, and I remember sitting there first time with our first group of mix of Chinese and international guests sitting there, and the monkey comes up and he sees the guest, and he kind of tips his little head, and I heard a little oh from the group. I go, yes, we got him. That's all it took. So as I mentioned, the ride system itself is a wireless system which allowed us to do that setup, show the thing, and pay it off, because we'd start and stop as we move through the attraction. You experience all these various rooms that are dedicated to the different antiquities that he finds, and the monkey, of course, has opened the music box. It's turned all these things to life. Some of them not so, some are benign, some are not so benign. As you can see, the monkey gets himself into danger. And ultimately, there's this grand finale where almost the whole mansion gets blown apart by the music dust. The monkey redeems himself, and everything's fine. You can go into the gift shop and buy stuff. Monkey, of course. So I feel very fortunate that I got to do this. I hope we're going to have some time to talk a little bit about this versus all the other great IP that Disney has that I get to develop too, because there's a value in both, I believe. All right, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. So we're going to bring up a very special guest, being honored this year, Lifetime Achievement, Ron Miziker. Everybody, Ron Miziker.
Good afternoon. Well, for those of you that don't know me, I spent 17 years with Disney. The first 10 I was director of all show development, live show development for all the theme parks. At that time, it was Disneyland, Disney World, Tokyo, Disney. And then after the 10 years, I went to the studio to be a television producer. And then when they decided to do the Disney Channel, I was put in charge of creating all the original shows for the Disney Channel. But let's go back to the early days, which was obviously doing shows for the theme parks. After I left Disney, um, I found it was a different experience out there when you're out in the world, and I'm sure many of you experienced that because you no longer have those huge budgets, you no longer have a team, so you really have to start from scratch. And you have to. The most important part is you have to find clients. So obviously, when you're out there looking for clients, I found it to be a very interesting world when it comes to brands. First, there's two kind of clients I found. One is those who, of course, want to have a show with Batman or whatever. And, of course, I have to explain to them, no, you just can't do a show with Batman as your theme. There's something called licensing here. And they say, well, let's license it. And then as soon as they find out what it takes and what it costs, they say, okay, we're throwing that out. Now I got to come up with another idea. So we're constantly working in that world of no brands and or creating or utilizing, as was presented, generic brands, and that's really been our big item to work with. The Another generic brand that's very popular is heritage and history and culture. And we've had many, many clients over the years say, create us a cultural show. And I go, no, you don't want a cultural show. Nobody wants a cultural show. They're boring. But what we can do is pick elements from your culture and perhaps create a whole different show with that. Something that is exciting and fun and enjoyable for the audience. So I was asked today to bring you an example of one of these projects. So let's kind of go down it. This was actually now it's been 15 years ago. So there was a new casino being formed down outside of out of San Diego, 35 miles east, in a place called Viejas. It's out in the middle of nowhere. Like I say, it's 35 miles out. It's off on a little side road, and as you can see, it's very disappointing. But they really turned it into quite a place. The top picture was an early picture, and the bottom picture is a more glamorous after the place was completely rebuilt and revitalized and so forth. And we were part of this rebuild situation. Anyway, I was first invited to come down by the chief, a man by the name of Anthony Pico. Californians, you may know who he is. He was very instrumental in the whole Indian gaming movement that took place here in California. And Anthony was a really interesting character. And he said to me, he said, look, we want a special show here. We got to do something to get people to drive all the way from San Diego out here to our casino out here in the middle of nowhere. So he said, I need for you to create a show that has certain characteristics. First, it has to have tribal tradition. Right there, I began to tremble a little, So what do you do? Second, he said, I wanted to feature new technology, something that can really work with the people today. And he said, but most of all, it has to be spectacular. I said, okay, I like that part of it. So let's see what we can do. The facility requirements, we actually had to design the facility itself. And it was to be a centerpiece for this whole retail complex that's directly across the street from the casino. It had to incorporate a wet fountain because they already ordered it. It had to accommodate 2,000 people in one showing, and it had to be able to be used in other ways. For instance, during the day, if they wanted to present something in the area, a band or whatever, it had to be able to be workable for that. So that was our direction. And so, the question was, what do we do? So we began looking into the tribal history a little bit, and we found, after searching through lots of books, we found this paragraph, this sentence here that says, sometimes at public ceremonies, the medicine men would have a contest, each trying to do more mysterious things than the other. Showing their power in public in this way not only brought them fame, but was good medicine for the village. So out of this came the thought, why not create the ultimate storyteller and see what we can do with that? So we did. These are original storyboards way back when. They're not nearly as expensive as the ones I used so often Disney. But the idea was, what if this Indian magically appeared? And he controlled everything. He controlled the nature. He controlled the wind and the fire and the water. And he could tell his story using these elements. And so he could, and we actually had this all happen, he could reach down and pull up a spout of water and push it back down and bring up another one. So he's absolutely controlled. And then when he brings up a spout of water, he puts his hand on it, and a laser comes out of his hand and draws the image of the character that he's talking about up on the screen up above. So we created this 360-degree show course in which we built this canopy around it so that this could happen. And then, as he continued, of course, this is all accompanied by music and effects and dialogue. We actually had him control fire. We use a little fountain begins in the center, and then he does his thing with it, and the fountain turns to fire. And on we went with the special effects. And finally, at the end, this big little fire now grows into this huge swirl of fire, and as it goes up, we have gaseous at the top that shoot over the top and create the ultimate fire experience that he created because it's part of his story. When we presented this, the chief looked at us and said, "Are you crazy?" And he said, "Can you do this?" And we said, "Yeah, we can do it." So we went ahead and did it. And the structure itself, again, the audience is 360 degrees around. And when built in, you see where the lighting is built into the truss system and so forth that holds the skins up above, so that it's all pretty well hidden. And the audience is all the way around. The show takes place in the center. Now, where we have the fountain in the center, we actually took an Indian pattern, dream catcher, and we had the fountain, built the fountain in this shape for it. Now, the interesting thing about this is that, again, the audience is 360 degrees. So how do you get your performer out there in the center? So we decided the only way we could do it is we had to build a lift in the center of this fountain so that it could be brought up from below as the fountain is shooting its waters up around it. And then the waters fell away. Sure enough, there he was, standing there, the Indian. And it disappeared at the end the same way. So this is the only wet fountain in the world that has an elevator lift in it. Anyway, this is the total concept of the picture, our original storyboard for it. And we actually produced the show, and you see in the upper left is he's changing the water into fire, the Indian. You see the gas jets up above, 2,000 people around. It performs nightly, and it performed for 7, 8 years nightly. And then here's a picture long shot of it. As you see the center court area is the round area in the top there. As part of our overall complex. So it really is a centerpiece to the whole facility there at the AHUS. In daytime, it looks like this. And again, you can see how the audience can be all the way around and the show takes place in the center. You see the points at the top where the gas shoots out, shoots 35 feet, each of those big flames. We have a reservoir of natural gas that's incredible, that pumps it out. And it's quite an amazing experience. You actually feel the heat, believe me, when you're standing there. Again, the audience watching the show, and with the fountain at one point. You see during the daytime, of course, it's it's one of those typical fountains kids can run through and so forth. They have no sign of the show there at all. So we really met all of his requirements. But what's important to this conversation this afternoon is the fact that this show became so popular that we were asked to do a second version. You know, it's after you do something that's really good and you're asked to do another one, it's tough, right? But we added a water screen, and we took another Indian story about a frog spirit that invades the spring. So the Indian warrior has to do battle with this frog spirit that's on the screen. So it's very dynamic. Again, we have lots of fire effects and water effects and everything built into it. But again, the key for our conversation today is the show became so successful, they turned it into their brand. They turned it in. It was incorporated in all of their marketing. Plus, they named a section of their casino Nightfire, which was our character. They made slot machines, Nightfire slot machines. They had special Nightfire cocktails, and of course they had the usual run of merchandise. So this was a situation where we actually took the show actually became the brand for the casino, and I think that's it.
Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about the business end of it, and the reasons that maybe perhaps owners and developers choose to go one way or another. We'll introduce Mark Dvorchak, please.
Yeah, it was great. I was going to say, it always comes back to money. It's interesting. Chris asked me to join the panel. He said it'd be nice to get another perspective, non-creative. Just a few thoughts. I think we went on for about a 2-hour conversation of all the different things that we could talk about with regard to IP on the business side. So I'm not going to go through that, but I did want to say, really probably the most interesting part of it always comes down to the $1 million question. Literally, it's like how much should you pay for an IP versus working on your own? That's quite frankly, it's a great question, and I don't know if there's an answer. It's also interesting to kind of put in a position probably between IP holders and non-IP holders. It's not a position we necessarily love to try to say something's worth X when you're in between in a negotiation. But what I want to do is just bring some thoughts out because it really is very, very specific to the situation. So from an economist perspective, 3 points that I'll probably make here before we go into some question and answer. One is to think about the value of the umbrella IP, or basically the having something branded on such a big level that people go, oh, I know I have to go there. They don't really know what's inside of it, but they're going there as a whole park operation. Versus the value of an attraction IP, some IP that was developed into a specific attraction. Now, a lot of times those go together, a lot of times they mix, but really there's a couple different ways to think. How is that valued and how is it bringing in revenue to the project? The short-term value versus the long-term value, very interesting question. Basically there's a quick way, a shot in the arm to get things going, get things producing cash flow quick, or is there something that in the end it's worth putting the time and energy into to create value in the IP and then harvesting that? And then the other thing that came to mind really is understanding who's the owner, and in some ways, what makes sense for them. So these are really the 3 topics I'm going to talk about. There's probably a million more. With regard to the umbrella versus the attraction, we see it a lot of times that especially when you go outside away from a domestic audience, is there more value in the positioning of the park as an IP park? Is that really all you need in some sense? Obviously, underneath there, the attractions that go into that have to make sense, but is that the real value? In other words, if you had an IP branded park, would people go to it because they're aware of it, they know of it, versus are they going to a park that doesn't have an umbrella IP, but they know there are certain attractions with the IP in it? You clearly get opening day awareness. If you open a park that has an IP, people already know about it. So day one, you kind of get a peek versus are you one of the parks that's going to try to grow into the business in the long term? A lot of times with an IP, you may get media support. It's kind of an unvalued, a value of that may you need to think about. That if you're partnering with an IP holder that is a media company, they could advertise that one of the great successes of the original Disney was the fact that there was a Disney TV show, and everyone was seeing it every day, every Sunday, and that's why they wanted to go there. And then with regard to an attraction IP, if you're developing a specific attraction, there is a business model in the industry where every year or every 2 years you have to have that thing to kind of pump up attendance again. It could be just a roller coaster, or is the IP and an attraction value what you want to use in that business model. So just within that, understanding the different scale of those two different things. The short-term versus the long-term value of the IP. Again, historically, the original parks, I also, those names that were on there of your favorite IP, to me, they still are emotional. I saw them when I was young, but there was a time that you could grow into those, and that people that weren't having, there wasn't so much competition for mind share, and they were allowed to develop and grow, and as good attractions. As great attractions, they became IP. Nowadays, how does that trade-off go versus it might just be an okay attraction, but with a great IP, does it still get you your business model? Can be a shortcut. But what you're really trying to do is if you're using the IP, you're leveraging that awareness. I mean, if IP comes out, not only is there millions and millions of dollars spent in these blitz advertising campaigns to get people to see the movie, the awareness factor and the value of that awareness is just beyond what you can do with real eyeballs in a real theme park. And can you leverage that? And that's what people are doing with the IP. They're saying day one we don't have to spend that; it's been spent. We're leveraging that. And then obviously some of the things it gets up to the billions of people who have read books and seen the movies or seen the campaigns. So it really is a compelling trade-off about that. But that runs also into one of the last points that I want to talk about is the owner perspective. It is interesting that where it kind of breaks down to me is that you have people that are in the IP business have ways to leverage an IP investment. Where some owners and developers we talk to, I mean, they're land developers, they're not operators, they're not going to be in the creation of IP industry. They're going to essentially, they want to develop, they want to make value on the land, and they want to get out. That's more appropriate than for an IP going with a licensing of an IP versus developing. But the other people you see that are in for the long haul, they say, listen, we are entertainment creators, operators. They are going to create parks. They're going to be in for the long haul. They are going to hopefully start looking for other ways to exploit the IP. I mean, it's interesting now. You don't create it just for one thing. Anytime somebody creates an IP, there's going to be all the different knockoffs. And you saw that in reverse with the Pirates of the Caribbean, where it became an IP, became a movie. But as you develop this, is this the way you want to do that? Create the IP, and then should we do a book? Should we get into different avenues, not just have it live in the theme park and go beyond? Can they afford the risk of an unsuccessful IP? I mean, nowadays when you talk about developing, it's the cost of doing that. We always look at it. Can you put all your eggs in one basket? If or do you want a portfolio approach? And almost now, with the level of it, you need 3 or 4 or 5, and hopefully a couple will take off if you're doing it yourself. And that way you can move in and out. So that's also a thought. The idea of trying to get to the valuing of the IP in those situations, and like I said, is really difficult. Because on the one hand, there's almost not enough pure data to look at it and analyze it between the two. There's some great case studies, though, that it can be analyzed out there. We looked at things like California Adventure, where you actually saw some transitions, to IP versus it being a non-IP park or self-made IP. But then you have examples of it going the exact opposite way. You have something like a Paramount Park being bought out by Cedar Fair and then not going with the IP. So the situation of when it's appropriate and what's the value of it is really kind of a very specific situation to the case, very specific to the owner or the operator. We love the challenge of trying to think about it, but it's obviously interesting when you get down to some of the different numbers. So anyway, those were some of the points I wanted to bring. I know we're going to get into questions and answers, and we can go more in depth on anything of interest.
Mark. All right. See if we can get a few questions in, get a little dialogue going, and I want to query the audience on a few concepts as well. Ron, earlier you talked about the owner wanting to go with an IP Batman or something first, so they found out what the cost was, and that was wiped off the table. That's an easy decision. It's a financial decision. In your case, you work for an organization that has the money to go one way or another. I could only imagine there's probably camps within the Disney organization that buy for one way or another. But was there ever discussion about making this Hong Kong expansion based around Frozen as opposed to creating something new? And what are those kind of struggles that you have internally with an organization like this?
You know, I think the core challenge is always to deliver a great product that's going to stand the test of time and touch people's emotions. We had the opportunity, because we had a partner who wanted something original, to go with it. It's kind of a rare case, especially with a company like Disney, where I got to say I'm excited by the fact that we have, and this is a marketing pitch or whatever, that we have now Lucasfilm and Star Wars and Marvel and all the great stuff that Pixar is doing. Not because it makes my job easier, because that's part of what I talked about earlier. When you develop something that's already known, the guests come pre-wired, it's easier to tap into those emotions. But if you even strip away the IP piece to it, the core of the stories and the places where you take people to, there's so much breadth to that. And when you're putting concrete and steel in the ground, you always have to think about, how is this thing going to be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now? And so many of those stories that those great creators, most of which Lucas and Pixar were fans of Walt, took all those same principles that Walt used about great characters, going to great places, the story of the hero's arc in there all remains the same. So for me, it was great to have that opportunity to develop something wholly new, but the challenges of taking something that exists already and finding what's at the core of it that's going to make it withstand the test of time is equally exciting.
Is there a challenge with an element of surprise? Do you have to stick with the script when you have a known IP, or can you deviate and create something new? Is that ever an option, or the outcome and the characters are already known, and usually they want to stick with the script? Is that something that you're?
It's a double-edged sword, because the guests come with an expectation. They've seen the movie, they heard the song, they read the book, and there are those things about it that they love. So you have to get to the core of what were those things and try to address them, but then find ways to present it, mostly using some kind of interesting technology, projecting it on a big water screen, using a great ride system, those things that can take what they saw in either a film form or a book form and present it in a three-dimensional way that makes it really exciting.
How about you, Ron? You have clients who come to you and say, I have my character that my daughter designed 5 years ago, and I want to make a theme park about it.
I've actually heard that exact line.
Sure.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I said earlier, we've had many clients who start out with, we want to get a brand, but then it always comes back to what can we create. And I take a little issue with what you just said, Joe, and that I think Walt Disney really understood the importance of generic brands. Look at Pirates, look at Haunted Mansion, look at Tomorrowland. I mean, he really took those generic brands and did incredible things with them, and creating his new characters and his new storylines with each of those. So I'm all for starting from scratch. Let's create our own character. Does it not draw people? Does it not have that same appeal? Sometimes I think it has more appeal, because but of course it's got to be a good show, or it's got to be a good attraction, whatever the attraction is, because people haven't seen it before. You're not then being compared to, your show is not being compared to the movie, for instance, you know, and what happens in the movie. You don't have a movie to compare it to, so you can do anything you want with it.
An element of surprise.
Yes.
On some level. I think that, I mean, they have that surprise when they go see the movie or they read a book. That when they have go to an attraction, they already know the story. It's the medium in which they're being entertained, the water screen or the special effects on some level. And that may be the right decision for a particular brand. What about the owners? Do they resist original IP because there's so much money into investing in theme parks today? And developers, you know, it's a development team rather than I'm in the theme park business and I'm in this for the next 50 years. I want to be the next Walt Disney. Is that really the issue?
I mean, money is always an issue, and when they're investing, that the scale of investment is also. If you're talking about $1 billion park, you know, it's hard to go to your investors and some of the people making the decision and say, you know, we don't have proof of that. Kind of like we said, all the eggs in one basket. You know, even in movies now, you know, you have to have 10 movies in the schedule. Hopefully, 2 are hits, 1's okay, and then you can lose on the other 3. You can't do that in a theme park. You know, if you go out there and it's a mess, you know, it's going to take tons of money to try to redo it, rebrand it, and then even then, you know, people's opinions of it, you know, linger no matter what you do. Change. You could create, you know, just a total new thing, and people won't. How long would it take them to get that? And I think that scares people. And again, I think also the owners, you know, if they're not in the IP creation business, they don't have other ways of seeing that investment, you know, that time exploited, you know, would probably shy away. You know, and it comes from what are they? What is the owner? Is the owner a developer? Is the owner in the entertainment?
Right.
There's a halfway point too, I think. The point being that myself or anybody in this room can actually go out and license IPs yourself, because many of the films that are done, particularly the older films, the studios have no control over the IP whatsoever. They have to go out and negotiate the rights to be able to use it in a theme park situation. Then they sell it to you. But if you go out and do your research, you can find a lot of IPs. A great one is Wizard of Oz. I can go out tomorrow and license that IP from the family that owns it. I don't have to pay the studio rates. I don't have to negotiate with studios. I have the right to that brand if I buy it. So there's that other way to go too.
What are the main, when we're going with original IP, from your perspective, from a creative perspective, what are the main elements that are required in order for it to be successful as a known brand? You mentioned early character development. Are there other elements that are important that you have to have in the mix in order for this to be a guaranteed success?
You got to do a good show or a good attraction. That's the key. It's the bottom line. The bottom line has got to be good. If it's good, it doesn't matter what it is. People will enjoy it and come back and see it over and over and over
again. That begs to my question, is IP relevant? Licensed IP relevant? If it's a good story, if it's a good attraction, if it's got great entertainment, if it's, you know, BB the Beehive or Harry Potter.
My response to that is that it's helpful. I'm sorry? Well, the IP for the Electrical Parade was Disneyland, because everything in the Electrical Parade is themed with Disney characters and so forth. But you know, when I did the original research on the Electrical Parade, what I found and what sort of set off the whole concept was the fact that back at the turn of the century, people, particularly in New York and Chicago, for a celebration, they used to string lights out on the street and walk in circles with them because the extension cords were only so long, and make it a part of their festival, you know? So it wasn't an original idea to make a parade of lights. It had been done before.
There's a lot of creatives in the house, and I'm sure you've had similar struggles. Anybody want to comment on maybe their personal experience? Here we go. Wait for the mic. It's coming.
Thank you. Yeah, that's one of the things we obviously I'll talk about. Nobody's talked about public domain. We did a project 10 years ago on Aesop's Fables. Another one, wonderful public domain.
I've used that one before myself.
Sure, exactly. And there's lots of them out there that are known entities. They often have the value of a paid IP, but you're allowed to do what you want with them. So I was wondering if you guys had any comments on that.
Are clients generally receptive to an older IP, right?
Many clients don't even know they exist. They think they have to go out and pay for things, and there's things you don't actually have to pay for. And there's a number of things like that out there that are in the public domain. And so I'm wondering whether you've used that as a tool in designs or offering to clients.
I consider that another generic brand because it is basically free and everybody knows Aesop Fables, Fables. So it's I put it in the same category. And like I said, I've used it before for a project and it worked very successfully.
And I would say, I mean, from the financial perspective, I think the idea is if you're paying for an IP, that IP better bring value for that. In other words, if you kind of come with a generic IP, is that going to bring people into the gate because like, Harry Potter, I've got to go see it, or is it, it might be a great theme within the park, and again, the park is selling the value. Then it's a great addition. But yeah, if you look at a paid IP, if they don't really bring in extra people over and above that, then that's the question of is it worth paying for it?
I just want to go back to what you were saying too. We use the Monkey King. Everybody knows the Monkey King, particularly in Asia, and that was the challenge with using the Monkey King was it's been interpreted so many different ways. So our concept in the show that we did with it was called the Misadventures of the Monkey King, in which everything went wrong for the Monkey King, and it worked very successfully.
We have time for maybe one more question. Yeah.
I think business people would think it's easier to retool a show versus a hardwired attraction. Because you could take that wonderful show you showed us, Ron, and if it didn't work quite, you probably fine-tuned it, I would guess. I mean, even the existing thing, but if the whole concept didn't work, you still have a theater, right? And you could redeploy that asset in a different way as opposed to a custom-built, bespoke attraction that's completely hardwired into that story. I think there's going to be a propensity to bet on something that comes pre-sold in the marketplace.
That's one of my selling pitches when I sell shows is instead of doing an attraction, why don't you do a really unique show attraction? Because it can be changed. It only has to run for a period of 3 or 4 years. It doesn't have to be there for an eternity, and you can refresh it by changing it somewhat, or you can get rid of it and do a new one to replace it. So there's, obviously I produce shows, so I pitch that way.
I think it's right. And then one other thing I would say is that there's financial loss and then there's corporate embarrassment. And movies bomb all the time, right? I mean, I think that's been said already. And they go into cable and they go into the archives and they just go away, period. And they're not really that embarrassing as long as there's something else coming out that does better. When it's an attraction, Jim Rouse and I pitched Frank Wells and Michael Eisner on the Hudson River across the Midtown at a site that was fantastic. And it ultimately came back from Peter Rummel that no, they didn't want to do it because to fail in the eyes of Wall Street was not what, even though it wouldn't cost necessarily any more than an expensive film, right? I mean, but it's because it's physical and it sits there and it's an embarrassment, potentially. Anyway.
I think audiences think differently about, what's successful and what's not successful. And there may be elements in something that's viewed as not successful. I'm going to use an example of Tron. Those films did not do great, but there's visual elements within them that are stunning, and there's an emotional piece to the thrill aspect of it. They're taking that and they're using it to develop an attraction for the Shanghai park. So while it's not well known as an IP or a strong IP, just like using Aesop's fables or something else, just as a source material, piece of a source that has something built into it that's interesting. You can take it and create something like what they're going to do in Shanghai, which is a coaster-based experience, which are always successful because guests like coasters. But it was the right marriage of some element of the story with the right kind of ride experience, and it'll hopefully withstand the test of time. And whether or not the guests really connect with that movie, there's going to be, again, as a source material, something that's going to help drive that final product and make it great.
Okay, we're going to wrap this up here. I think it's a great dialogue. I think the industry should continue to talk about this subject matter. I think it's important that we move in the right direction. Oh.
Or is there a certain point where you've gone too far with an IP where you think it's detrimental to the brand, an attraction or a show, or in using theme parks or attractions?
My quick answer would be, yeah, I think you leverage the IP, but if you over leverage, it's hard to tell when. But I think there was a history back in Disney and Eisner where it's like, yeah, you can keep doing these things, but at some point you do start in the long term losing the potential value, and holding back sometimes actually kind of kept it. You can oversaturate and kill a brand. Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Joe Cicero, Ron Miziker.